Welcome back to the series of me talking about Daniel Hughes' wonderful book, Building the Bonds of Attachment, a book I very much recommend buying if you want more than just the small bits my videos are showing. So far, this series has been a bit of a bleak pattern of nothing ever quite working. You know, when I started reading this book, I think I fell off about this point and started reading something else, which is probably fitting, because after a while, without sense of hope, we can just stop wanting to think about these sort of things. I think Katie is the sort of child that, after bouncing from home to home and things endlessly going wrong, Stephen Fields or whoever else could kind of give up on Katie, still sending her to homes and trying things, but much more just going through the motions, not exhausting their stresses or trying to really find an answer so much as just resigning themselves to the pattern. That's not what happens in the story, obviously. This chapter, in fact, is the last chapter where the foster home doesn't work. After this one, they will start to find a way forwards and things will begin the slow process of change. So, I just wanted to say that before I put you through another quite bleak chapter. Last time things went badly wrong with Karen and Ken, and the reveal of Katie being tied to a chair and slapped and scratched. Well, now we have her moving to live with Susan and Richard Cummings, who Stephen suggests remind him of Ruth and Ray Daly. They're experienced foster parents. They have 2 children who are grown up and have moved away, as well as 2 other foster children, Jessica, who is 9, and Dan, who is 12. We'll remember things didn't go well when Katie lived with the 3-year-old Dustin. However, both these children are older than Katie. She's only 6, so perhaps they'll be better to cope with her, is the line of thinking. And the chapter begins just as you'd expect it would. Any desire Katie had to continue living with Karen is dropped as soon as she realises it's not possible, without any emotion or sense of loss. She shows her charming side to her new foster parents, immediately calling Susan mum, wanting to sit in the front of the car with her rather than be in the back, asking all sorts of questions in an upbeat, friendly manner, and even telling Susan about how Karen, her last mother, had abused her in various ways. Susan reassured her that she would not do those things to her. Stephen was glad that Katie had addressed the issue so directly, though he was puzzled by how quickly she had begun to speak of Karen in such a negative manner. And when Stephen then tries to explain the Karen situation a little more, Katie then turned to Stephen with a tone meant to end all debate and said, "She was mean to me, and I don't like her." So it's the same pattern again here, really. The old parent was mean, this new one is great, and I'm going to charm her. That was the line of thinking Karen and Ken were led into. Susan could be in danger of the same. Katie seemed to settle into Susan's home fairly well over the first few months. She wanted to be with Susan a great deal, talking to her about anything and wanting to know everything. Only when Richard came home did she give Susan a rest. Richard immediately liked Katie. She was so friendly and affectionate. Jessica and Dan were much less favourably impressed with Katie. She seldom played with them unless she needed them to do something for her. Whenever they went to Susan to talk or relax, she would try to get between them and Susan. If they hugged Susan, she would stop whatever she was doing and hug Susan twice. She would interrupt their conversations when they asked Susan for help and would find things that she needed Susan for. What we see straight away is someone trying to gain control over the family. Charm Susan and Richard, isolate Jessica and Dan so that the focus is on her. She knows everything and is the central figure in everything. Sibling rivalry and wanting to feel like the special child is, of course, natural and common, although what happens here goes beyond it and is a bit different, as the book explains itself quite succinctly. Katie wanted affection from Susan only when she saw her siblings seeking affection. She had no interest in affection itself. As an infant she had wanted affection. Now the reminder of it that she saw in Jessica and Dan's actions towards Susan elicited distress, which she wanted to avoid. She wanted to keep Susan available for meeting her concrete needs. If Susan were attending to other children, she would not be available for Katie. And as the story goes on, we see Susan noticing a pattern that whenever she does something with Dan or Jessica, one of their things would go mysteriously missing or end up broken, which is Katie's typical pattern of seeking revenge, but also interesting for how it enrages Dan and Jessica. We're given a good example about Dan's Game Boy, where the book explains to us that Dan and the foster parent Richard were very close. Never before had Dan had a father who wanted to be with him and appreciated his efforts and abilities. When Richard had managed to attend his last football match, Dan felt a degree of pride and joy that he could barely contain. And it describes quite touchingly how Dan and Richard were raking leaves together. Katie and Jessica were playing on the swing at the time, which was unusual, and Dan noticed it, and then looking closer saw that Katie had his Game Boy. And naturally, after countless other occurrences of Katie doing things to wind him up, this enraged Dan. He came over and told her not to use it, which she ignored, so he yelled. Katie looked up, stared at him, and then went back to the game. "Katie!" Dan screamed as he threw down the rake and ran towards her. She still ignored him. "Give me that!" "No!" she screamed back, and then suddenly threw it into the driveway. Dan ran to it. There was nothing on the screen. He tried to get it to operate, but it would not. He ran back to Katie, who was at the top of the slide and trying to escape by sliding down. As she was halfway down, Dan pushed her over the side, where she landed on her back and let out a piercing scream. Richard watched Katie fall and ran to her, pushing Dan aside. "Get in the house!" he yelled at Dan. "She broke my Game Boy. Shut up and get out of here. I don't want to see you." Richard bent down and attended to Katie. She reached for him, and he held her. The thing is, after he tends to Katie, Richard is left uncommonly angry about the occurrence. He storms to Dan's room and he shouts, "Don't you ever touch her again. She's always breaking my stuff. I don't care what she breaks of yours. She's just a little girl, and you will not hit her again if you want to live here." Dan became motionless, as if he'd been hit. It's just so horrible, isn't it? I mean, poor Dan, a kid who's never had a father he was close to, finally gets someone like that, and then Richard makes a threat of sending him away. Obviously Richard won't have meant it, but just poor Dan. And again, we're pointing these things out not really to say it's anyone's fault, but to recognise and understand the sort of dynamics that can play out. Dan and Jessica getting isolated, Richard completely charmed by Katie and becoming much more protective and worked up in defence of her than he might usually have been. As a side note, I think there's like horror films that sort of draw on this kind of premise, isn't there? Of like a good, kind family letting in some helpless outsider to their home, only for that person to gradually turn them all against each other. It's not just Jessica and Dan that get affected either. After a while, Richard and Susan become more opposed of each other, described best with an example of Christmas. Because Susan's family have always had this tradition where every year each child gets a new ornament to hang on the Christmas tree, one that's like their ornament. And so every year they get all these old ornaments out of the box from each year's, and they see what they've got over the years again, and it's just kind of a sweet reminder of years passing. Last year, Jessica's had been a white swan, which she had adored and been eager to see again ever since it was packed away last Christmas. And we're given a description of them decorating the tree, first with the ordinary decorations, and how Jessica put a bauble on a spot where Katie had wanted to place hers. A few minutes later, Susan looked up to see Katie look towards Jessica, smile, and then drop a large book on Jessica's white swan. Susan and Jessica both screamed. Jessica ran to the book and lifted it up, revealing the shattered ornament. "Why did you do it?" Susan grabbed Katie's arm and yelled at her. "It was an accident. I saw you do it. You did it on purpose. That was a very bad thing to do." And then Richard comes in and is a lot calmer and says, "Maybe it was an accident." "It was not. I saw her do it. She's going to tell me why." "Don't you think you're overreacting?" asked Richard. "Maybe she did do it on purpose, but she didn't realise how important it was to Jessica." "She did realise it. She knew what she was doing and she enjoyed hurting Jessica." Susan was becoming annoyed with her husband. "Let's just drop it, Susan." So I've talked a lot before, but it is always important in any counselling related work. Not just noticing their behaviour, but noticing the dynamics around the client, noticing the dynamics you yourself might be getting drawn into and thinking, hang on, is something happening here? Is there a level of splitting between Susan and Richard? Are they now arguing the way Sally and Mike used to argue with each other, where Katie becomes largely content seeing them be angry bad ones amongst each other rather than her all the time, where she's content seeing them argue because it means she gets left alone? We get a mention of a Dr. Vahldieck trying out a few different antidepressants for Katie, none of which seem to have any effect. We aren't really given any information about that at all, so I won't comment on it other than to say yep, nothing seems to be working. We get some nice lines from Susan in a conversation with Stephen as well. Her good behaviour over the first few months seems like an effort to charm me and Richard. I think that she even thought we might get rid of Jessica and Dan. All her negativity was directed towards them, and now we haven't gotten rid of them, it's become directed at me. Even Richard now. So we get examples of behaviour worsening where Katie gets suspended for kicking her teacher at school. You know, kicking your teacher at any age is a pretty big thing, let alone when you're 6, and her smashing a window at home with a TV remote and locking herself in the car for hours. Everybody starts to feel pretty hopeless, that's the theme. She's not like Jessica and Dan who want to do better. When they mess up, they seem a little sorry anyway and are almost grateful to do something to make up for it. But with Katie, she doesn't care. It's the rest of the family's fault. If there is a natural consequence to what she has done, we'll pay for it as if we have no right to be so cruel to her. And even the therapist Jan Temple feels stuck. Jan knew that if she pressed too hard, Katie would insist on ending therapy early that day and they would be locked in a power struggle until the session finally ended. Katie chose to play with a dollhouse. The child figure was aggressive. On this occasion she went further. She took the furniture from the entire house and placed the pieces in the pile in the living room. She left the baby upstairs. She then pretended to set the furniture on fire and the entire house burned down. The baby, of course, died. Jan wondered if the baby represented Susan and her family or Katie herself. Probably both, she thought. When she suggested that to Katie, she received a "shut up" with more force than usual. Maybe she got through to Katie. If so, would it do any good? You know, Jan's not doing anything wrong here. Katie is expressing her feelings via play. There is stuff to work with there, but Jan feels a bit stuck with how to work with it. She is making an interpretation, but she feels a bit like she's just going through the motions of Katie plays with something, I make some comment linking it to a family, and that's another session over. After working with Katie for over a year, that's a dynamic you might fall into. It's not a criticism of Jan, it's just things are feeling a bit stuck, and nobody's quite got the sense of how to move forwards. They try a behavioural specialist again, but his advice is much the same as before about a reward system and all of that. And then we get to the 1st of May, where the family hold a big barbecue every year as a family tradition. Susan has her own parents over for it as well as some other family, and the day starts out okay. She and Katie are working together to wash vegetables for the salads and to prepare the ground beef. When Katie gets bored washing the lettuce, they switch jobs to keep her entertained, but then Susan's parents arrive, so, you know, Susan nips out to speak to them before returning to the kitchen with her mum. When they entered the kitchen together, Jessica was there making lemonade. Katie was not. "Where's Katie?" asks Susan. "She went to her room." Susan assumes she just inevitably got bored, so she returns to the beef herself. Susan took one in her hand and began to form it into a ball. Something was wrong. It didn't feel right, it didn't look right. It smelled awful. Susan had a bad feeling when she thought of Katie in her room. She took one of the burgers and knocked on Katie's door. When she entered, Katie had a look like she'd done something wrong. She became aware that the smell was much worse in Katie's room. She walked in and looked behind the bed. On the floor were Katie's soiled underpants and a towel smeared with feces. "Katie, did you poop in the burger meat?" Susan screamed. Katie's look removed all doubt. Katie was pleased. She had done something that would really upset Susan. She was enjoying Susan's look of horror. Susan didn't know what to do or say. Tears came to her eyes. She felt like rubbing the meat in Katie's face. She wanted to drag her into the kitchen by her hair and make her clean it all up and tell everyone what she had done. Susan could not accept having such feelings, so she could not feel anything towards Katie anymore. She was beaten. She had done what she could for this child for 8 months. Now she could only cry. She left Katie's room saying nothing more. Susan needed to be with her mother. She needed to grieve with her mother. Katie did not grieve. She was as content as she was capable of being. I don't quite know what your reaction to that bit of the story will be. If you find it disgusting and pretty disturbing, or if you find it sad or kind of funny. It obviously is very, very sad. It's sad for Susan, of course, but it's sad to see Katie doing these things, knowing how it's making her own life worse for her. Knowing she's endlessly sabotaging her own life and unable to really stop it happening. It's sad. The behaviour is, of course, realistic as well. Feces is a very symbolic thing, and we've had mentions already, actually, of Katie peeing on the sofa and things in previous homes. As the book puts it, feces in the hamburger was to her an amusing representation of the contempt for the efforts of others to enjoy themselves. Mutual enjoyment necessarily excluded her, and she would not tolerate it. If Katie is not really able to have shared fun with others, and if those sort of scenarios bring up an unfamiliar sense of attachment that causes her distress, then that means everyone else would inevitably have a fun day, but not her, which means she's left out where everyone else has fun. So how can she reverse that? How can she ruin their day and twist it into her own triumph? We've got to the end of the chapter. Susan has been beaten. Jan feels hopeless. Stephen feels hopeless. It's at this point that he consults Dawn at the central office. That's all we're told about her, but she suggests, why don't you have Katie evaluated by Alison Kaplan? She's done a lot of work with children who have difficulty forming an attachment to the foster or adoptive parents. Some of my kids have seen Alison in the past, Betty said. She did a good job. Her therapy isn't like what many therapists offer. And I think that's the first real shift now. There's been a theme this video of nothing working, things repeating, that just going through the motions without really thinking or searching further, but now there is an option, and that begins with the evaluation done by Alison Kaplan and the interaction she has there with Katie and some of the positives we see within it. However, that's quite a long extract and one that's better to leave to its own video, so that will come next time. However, I did say I wanted this video to end on a bit more of a hopeful note, so I'm going to end with a scene described between Stephen Fields and his own daughter Rebecca. We have a few scenes appearing briefly throughout the book with Rebecca, normally as examples to compare against Katie's upbringing, but let me just read a bit of the extract. Rebecca had an idea. She grabbed Stephen's finger and dragged him towards the doorway to the hall, while pointing and saying, "Phone." Knowing her plan, he walked with her to the play area in the corner and sat with her on the floor. She reached for a playphone, held it to her ear and said, "Hi, Dada." He picked up a book to cover his face. "Hi, Becca." She paused for a moment, as she usually did, then she said, "Home, Dada." He replied, "I'm almost home, Becca. What's for supper?" She jumped up and ran to the kitchen. He heard Jenny whisper to their daughter. Then she ran back and grabbed the phone. "Sketty!" she yelled back. "Spaghetti! Great, I'll be home fast." Her eyes grew wide as she watched and listened while Stephen made loud car sounds from behind the book. Then he knocked on the book. She got up and pulled the book out of his hands. He exclaimed, "Becca, I'm home." She smiled and grabbed him again. He picked her up and they went into the kitchen to greet Jenny. I'm detailing this because these sort of interactions are important. They're both undivided attention, but they're also just fun. Having fun and enjoying Becca's presence, having connection and a good time together. Arguably worse than the physical abuse Katie suffered was the neglect and total absence of these experiences, just being ignored, particularly as a very young baby, ignored or shouted at to be quiet. How can you be expected to connect if you've never had any experiences of it, even as a little baby in a cot? So that's going to be a crucial part of the work we see ahead in the story, having fun with Katie, enjoying her company, slowly helping her to discover, oh, people can enjoy my presence after all. What a huge revelation that will be for her. Not an easy one to reach, and we know too much fun in one go causes great distress, hence having the fun possibility of a barbecue and sabotaging it, but manageable doses to begin with, manageable moments of connection and of fun. Obviously there's going to be a lot of other things needed too, but still, we've got that ahead, a sense of fun. How often do you think people have made Katie laugh, or she has made them laugh? How often have they shared humour with her, you know? So yeah, that is just one point, but we'll get into more with the next episode. I hope you're still enjoying this series. I hope you're still eager for it to continue. Thank you for your support so far. Obviously, all the regular points. You know, please like the video, comment to show your support, become a patron if you want, or buy the book. Links below. But otherwise, hopefully see you next time. As ever, a special thank you goes to Devin, Darren Burdock-Latter, Kestrel, Arwen, Stephen Legg, Samara Salsi, Sharokoff2814, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell, and Incomplete Sentence. Thank you.